In addition to the initial point density and rays per final gather point, there are two other very important parameters that you're going to need to adjust. First of all, interpolate over number of final gather points. That's a bit of a mouthful, but what this does is it applies a smoothing factor to your rendering by essentially blending all these points together. And the number here determines how many of these points are going to be blended with other points. So a good range of this is usually, once again, between about 50 and about 200. So this value of 30 is definitely way too low. So I'm going to set this to, let's try 100 and do a render and see how that softens up our scene. So as you can see, by increasing the interpolation from 30 to 100, we're getting a much softer look here, and we're almost losing that kind of blotchy look that we were getting. So we could increase this up to maybe about 200 and try again. So now you see we're getting a much softer look to their rendering. And these settings are pretty good for this particular scene and this particular view. But as always, your mileage may vary. So now that you understand how these work, you can kind of play with this and get it tuned so that it looks good. The last thing I want to mention in this dialog here is the number of diffuse bounces. This is an important one because it determines whether a final gather ray is going to generate additional final gather rays. In other words, with diffuse bounces set to 0, what happens is light hits a surface and then bounces off to illuminate another surface. So, light ray might hit this wall and then bounce off to illuminate this other wall here. So that's with the diffuse bounces of 0. If I set it to 1, then we're going to get an additional ray generated. So light might hit this wall, bounce, hit the other wall, and then bounce back. So this number is a bit misleading because diffuse bounces set to 0, you're actually getting 1 bounce for free. If diffuse bounces is set to 1, you're actually getting 2 diffuse bounces. So that's a bit confusing. But with this set to 1, when I render, it's going to make my scene immediately brighter. It'll take longer to render, of course, because more calculation is required. So the practice that you want to follow here is diffuse bounces should be set to either 0 or 1. Don't bother increasing it beyond 1 because you won't see an appreciable difference in your rendering and it's going to just take a lot longer. The higher the number of diffuse bounces, the more quote-unquote physically accurate the rendering will be, but you won't notice the effect on the screen and it'll just take longer to render. So again, my advice is diffuse bounces should be set to 0, especially for test renders, and then when you're ready to do your final render, turn it up to 1, but no farther than that.